A lone rancher saved a wounded Comanche girl, but 50 warriors arrived. The bullet had already torn through her shoulder when Jake Murphy found her crawling across his land. Blood stained the dirt behind her in a dark trail that led back toward the canyon, and her breathing came in sharp, desperate gasps. She couldn't have been more than 16 years old, her buckskin dress shredded and her long black hair matted with dust and sweat. Jake dropped from his horse without thinking, his rifle still in hand, and knelt beside her. Her eyes flashed with fear and defiance even as her strength failed. He lifted her carefully, feeling her body tense against him. She tried to speak but only managed a wet cough that brought blood to her lips. Jake carried her toward his small ranch house, scanning the horizon as he moved. Whoever had shot her might still be close. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and something worse, something that made his gut tighten. He kicked open his door and laid her on his kitchen table, grabbing clean cloth and whiskey from his cabinet. The girl's eyes followed his every movement as he cut away the torn fabric around her wound. The bullet had passed clean through, which meant he wouldn't have to dig for it, but she'd lost a lot of blood. He poured whiskey over the wound, and she screamed, her back arching off the table. Jake held her down with one hand while he worked, packing the wound front and back with cloth strips. Her screams faded to whimpers, then to shallow breathing. When he finally stepped back, his hands were covered in her blood. The girl stared at him with dark eyes that held more questions than he could answer. He didn't speak Comanche, and she clearly didn't speak English, but the look they exchanged needed no words. She was alive because of him, and that simple fact had just complicated his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Jake went to the window and looked out across his property. The sun was dropping low, painting the sky orange and red. In the fading light, he saw them. Riders on the ridge to the north, at least a dozen silhouettes against the sunset. They sat motionless on their horses, watching his ranch. His throat went dry. He grabbed his rifle and checked the ammunition, then moved to the other windows. More riders to the east, more to the south. They were surrounding him. The girl made a sound from the table, and when Jake turned, she was pointing at the riders with a trembling hand. She spoke rapidly in Comanche, her voice urgent and afraid. Jake didn't need a translation to understand. Those warriors had come for her, and they'd seen him carry her inside. He'd just become part of something much bigger than a simple rescue. He barred the door and checked his ammunition again. 3 boxes of cartridges, his rifle, and his revolver. The ranch house was solid timber with small windows, built to withstand the harsh Texas weather and occasional raids, but Jake had never faced odds like this. He looked at the girl again. She'd managed to sit up on the table, one hand pressed against her bandaged shoulder. Despite her pain, she was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Jake moved back to the north window. The riders were closer now, descending from the ridge in a long line. He could make out individual warriors, their horses moving with practiced ease across the rocky terrain. As darkness fell, he counted them by the light of the rising moon. Not a dozen, not 2 dozen, 50 warriors, maybe more, forming a wide circle around his property. They made no sound, gave no war cries. They simply positioned themselves and waited. The girl spoke again, softer this time. Jake turned and saw tears running down her face. She touched her chest and said a word he didn't understand, then pointed to the warriors outside. Family, he realized. She was trying to tell him about her family. He nodded slowly and moved closer to the table. The girl reached out with a good arm and gripped his wrist with surprising strength. She spoke again, the same word repeated, and Jake heard the plea in her voice. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, his rifle across his lap. Whatever happened next would determine whether he saw another sunrise. The warriors outside weren't going to leave without her, and they'd seen him take her inside. In their eyes, he might be her captor or her savior, and Jake had no way to tell them which. All he could do was wait and hope that when morning came, he'd find a way to make them understand he'd only wanted to help. The night stretched ahead of him like a long, dark road with no end in sight. Jake checked his rifle one more time and settled in to watch. The girl's breathing had steadied, and that was something. He'd saved her life, at least for now. Whether that act of mercy would be his salvation or his doom remained to be seen. Outside, the warriors waited in silence, and the moon climbed higher in the Texas sky. The first arrow struck Jake's door at dawn, punching through the thick wood and embedding itself in the far wall. Jake rolled from his chair and grabbed his rifle, his heart hammering. The girl cried out from the table, trying to stand despite her injury. A second arrow followed, then a third, each one precise and powerful. They weren't trying to kill him yet. They were sending a message. Jake crawled to the window and peered out. The warriors had moved closer during the night, forming a tighter circle around his ranch. In the gray morning light, he could see their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. One warrior sat apart from the others on a massive paint horse, his headdress marking him as someone important. The chief, Jake guessed, or a war leader. The man raised his hand and the arrows stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the attack. Jake could hear his own breathing, could hear the girl whispering prayers or curses in Comanche. He looked back at her and saw she'd managed to stand, clutching the table for support. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were fixed on the window. She said something urgent and pointed outside. Jake moved aside so she could see. When the girl saw the warrior on the paint horse, she gasped. She called out in Comanche, her voice cracking with emotion. The warrior's head turned toward the sound. He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward the house, stopping just beyond rifle range. He was older than Jake had first thought, maybe 50, with scars crossing his chest and arms. His face was hard as granite. The warrior shouted something in Comanche, his voice carrying across the distance. The girl responded, her words tumbling out in a rush. Jake stood frozen, watching the exchange he couldn't understand. The warrior's expression changed subtly, the anger in his eyes mixing with something else. Relief, maybe, or concern? He spoke again, quieter this time, and the girl answered. Then the warrior switched to broken English, his accent thick but his words clear enough. He pointed at Jake. "You hurt, girl?" Jake shook his head quickly. "No. I found her shot. I helped her." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "Who shoot?" "I don't know. She was already wounded when I found her on my land." The girl spoke rapidly in Comanche, gesturing to her shoulder and then to Jake. The warrior listened, his face unreadable. When she finished, he looked at Jake with new intensity. "She say you save. She say you give medicine? This truth?" "Yes." I pulled her inside and stopped the bleeding. She needed help. The warrior was silent for a long moment. The other warriors had drawn closer, listening. Jake could feel their eyes on him, could feel the weight of their judgment. One wrong word and they'd rush the house. He'd kill maybe 3 or 4 before they overwhelmed him, and then it would all be over. The girl called out again, louder this time. She moved toward the door, stumbling but determined. Jake started to help her but stopped himself, unsure if touching her would make things worse. She reached the door and fumbled with the bar. Jake moved quickly and lifted it for her, pulling the door open. The morning air rushed in, cold and fresh. The girl stepped outside, wavering on her feet. The warrior on the paint horse moved forward, his hand outstretched, but she turned back to Jake first, meeting his eyes. She spoke in Comanche, her voice soft but firm, then reached out and touched his arm gently. "Thank you," her gesture said clearly. "I owe you my life." Then she walked toward the warrior, each step obviously painful. When she reached him, he caught her before she fell. He held her carefully, examining her bandaged shoulder. His face showed no emotion, but his hands were gentle. He asked her something, and she answered, pointing back at Jake. The warrior looked up, and for the first time, Jake saw something other than hostility in those dark eyes. The warrior lifted the girl onto his horse, then turned to face Jake fully. He raised his right hand, palm forward, in a gesture Jake recognized as peaceful. Then he spoke in English again. "My daughter. You saved my daughter." He touched his chest. "I am Chief Running Bear." "You are brave, man." Jake's legs nearly gave out from relief. He nodded, not trusting his voice. The chief continued. "My daughter tell me white men attack. 4 riders. They shoot her, chase her. She hide in canyon, then crawl to your land. She thinks she die." He paused, his jaw tightening. "You give her life back. This is great gift. I did what anyone would do," Jake managed to say. Running Bear shook his head. "No. Most white men would not help Comanche girl. Most would leave her to die. Or worse." His eyes hardened at some memory. "You are different. You have honor." Jake wasn't sure what to say to that. He'd acted on instinct, nothing more. But he could see this meant something important to the chief and his warriors. The girl... The chief's daughter spoke again from the horse. Running Bear listened, then looked back at Jake with an expression that might have been respect. "My daughter say you protect her all night. Say you ready to fight 50 warriors to keep her safe." The chief's lips curved in something almost like a smile. "This is truth?" Jake glanced at his rifle, still in his hand. "I wasn't going to let anyone take her until I knew she'd be safe." Running Bear nodded slowly. "You would die for stranger. for enemy of your people. This is the way of true warrior." He gestured to the other warriors. "They want to kill you when we first see you take our girl. I say we wait. We watch. If you hurt her, we burn your house with you inside. If you help her, we see what kind of man you are." The chief walked his horse closer until he was just a few feet from Jake. "You passed test, Jake Murphy. You show courage and honor. My people will remember this." He raised his voice so all the warriors could hear, speaking in Comanche. The warriors responded with calls and raised weapons, but now the sound was not threatening. It was almost celebratory. Running Bear reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a beaded necklace. He tossed it to Jake, who caught it instinctively. "This is my mark. You wear this, and any Comanche will know you are a friend. You will have safe passage through our lands. Your cattle, your horses, your property will be protected. Any man who harms you will answer to me." Jake looked down at the necklace in his hand, feeling its weight. It was beautifully made, with intricate patterns in blue and white beads. "Thank you, Chief Running Bear. I don't know what to say. Say you will remember. White man and Comanche can be enemies, or can be something else. You choose something else. We honor that choice." The chief turned his horse. "My daughter will heal. When she is strong, she will return to thank you proper. Until then, you have our gratitude and our protection." Running Bear rode back toward his warriors, his daughter held safely in front of him. The warriors began to disperse, riding off in different directions. Within minutes, the circle around Jake's ranch had broken. The warriors disappeared into the landscape as silently as they'd come, leaving only dust and the memory of their presence. Jake stood in his doorway, the necklace still in his hand, watching them go. The sun was fully up now, bright and warm. His ranch looked the same as it always had, but everything felt different. He'd woken yesterday as a simple rancher trying to survive on hard land. Now he was something else. A friend to the Comanche, a man marked by honor. He went back inside and looked at the blood-stained table where he'd worked on the girl. On the floor lay the cloth he'd used for bandages, and nearby was the whiskey bottle, nearly empty. Such simple things, but they'd changed his life completely. Jake picked up the necklace and slipped it over his head. It settled against his chest, the beads cool against his skin. Outside, a hawk circled in the clear blue sky. Jake watched it for a moment, then got to work cleaning up. There was much to do, as always, on a ranch. But now he worked with a lighter heart, knowing that the greatest danger he'd ever faced had become an unexpected alliance. The Comanche would remember what he'd done, and so would Jake Murphy for the rest of his days. 3 weeks passed before Jake saw any Comanche again. He'd almost started to wonder if the whole encounter had been some kind of fever dream, except for the necklace he wore every day and the arrows still stuck in his door. He'd left them there as a reminder of how close he'd come to death. Life on the ranch returned to its usual rhythm of hard work and solitude. He mended fences, tended his small herd of cattle, and tried not to think too much about what had happened. Then one morning he woke to find a deer carcass hanging from his porch rail, freshly killed and dressed. No note, no sign of who'd left it, but Jake knew. He scanned the horizon and saw nothing but empty land. The Comanche were watching over him, just as Running Bear had promised. It was an eerie feeling knowing he was being protected by people he couldn't see. A week after that, Jake rode out to check on his cattle and found 2 of his steers that had wandered off, neatly herded back toward his property. Fresh hoof prints in the dirt told the story. Again, no warriors in sight, but their presence was unmistakable. Jake touched the necklace under his shirt and nodded his thanks to the empty prairie. The real test came on a hot afternoon in late summer, when Jake spotted riders approaching from the east. 5 men on horseback, riding hard and raising dust. Jake's hand went instinctively to his rifle. These weren't Comanche. As they got closer, he could see they were white men, rough-looking and heavily armed. Drifters or worse, he guessed. The kind of men who made their living taking what others had worked for. The riders pulled up in front of Jake's house, their horses lathered and tired. The leader was a big man with a scar running down his left cheek and cold blue eyes. He looked at Jake's small ranch with obvious contempt. "This your place?" he asked without preamble. "It is," Jake said, keeping his voice level. "What can I do for you?" The scarred man grinned, showing broken teeth. "We're looking for some horses that got away from us. Spotted them near here. You seen any loose horses?" Jake hadn't seen any horses, but he knew a lie when he heard one. These men were sizing up his property, looking for easy pickings. "Haven't seen any. Just my own stock." Another rider, younger with mean eyes, laughed. "That so? Well, maybe we should take a look around." "Make sure you're not hiding our property." "I don't think that'll be necessary," Jake said.
His hand tightened on his rifle.
5 against 1. Bad odds, but he'd faced worse recently. The scarred man dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. Now, friend, we're just trying to recover what's ours. No need to be unfriendly about it. He took a step toward Jake. That's a nice necklace you got there. Indian made, ain't it? You trade with the savages? Jake felt a cold fury building in his chest. I'd advise you to get back on your horse and ride on. You're not welcome here. The scarred man's grin widened. Is that right? Boys, I think this fellow needs a lesson in hospitality. The other riders started to dismount. Jake raised his rifle, and the scarred man laughed. You gonna shoot all 5 of us? You might get 1, maybe 2. Then what? Before Jake could answer, an arrow thudded into the ground at the scarred man's feet. Then another, and another, forming a line between the intruders and Jake's house. The 5 men spun around, reaching for their weapons. Warriors emerged from behind rocks, from the tall grass, from places that had seemed completely empty moments before. 20 Comanche warriors, maybe more, all with arrows nocked and ready. Running Bear rode forward on his paint horse. The chief's daughter sat behind him, her shoulder heeled, her face stern. The chief looked at the 5 intruders with undisguised contempt. You threaten our friend, he said in his accented English. You make a big mistake. The scarred man had gone pale. We didn't know. We were just passing through. You lie, Running Bear said flatly. You come to steal, maybe to kill. He gestured to his warriors. We watch this land. We protect this man. You understand? One of the younger riders bolted, spurring his horse into a run. A warrior on horseback caught up to him in seconds, cutting him off and forcing him to turn back. The rider rejoined his companions, his face white with fear. The scarred man raised his hand slowly. We're leaving. Right now. Too late for no trouble, Running Bear said. You already bring trouble. Now you pay price. He spoke in Comanche, and the warriors moved closer, forming a tight circle around the 5 men. You have 2 choices. 1, you leave everything. Horses, guns, supplies. You walk away with your lives. 2, you try to fight, and we kill you here. He paused. Choose now. The scarred man looked at his companions, then back at the ring of warriors. Jake could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. Finally, the man nodded. We'll take the first choice. Smart, Running Bear said. Now drop your weapons. All of them. The 5 men dismounted and began removing their gun belts, their rifles, their knives. They piled everything on the ground, moving slowly and carefully. When they were unarmed, Running Bear gestured to the north. Walk that way. Don't stop. Don't look back. If we see you again, we kill you on sight. The men started walking, their boots scuffing in the dirt. Jake watched them go, hardly believing what he was seeing. The warriors maintained their circle until the intruders were at a rifle range, then began to relax. Running Bear dismounted and approached Jake, his daughter following. They would have killed you, the chief said simply. Taken everything. We could not allow this. Jake nodded, his throat tight. Thank you. I was about to make a last stand. Running Bear's daughter stepped forward. She looked healthier now, her color good, her movements confident. She wore a new buckskin dress decorated with beads and quill work. She spoke in halting English, each word carefully pronounced. You saved my life. Now we save yours. We are even. She smiled, and Jake was struck by how young she looked when she wasn't bleeding and terrified. What's your name? Jake asked. The girl glanced at her father, who nodded. Morning Dove, she said. I am Morning Dove, daughter of Running Bear. She touched the necklace around Jake's neck. You wear my father's mark with honor. This make me happy. Running Bear collected the weapons and horses left by the intruders. These are yours now, he told Jake. 5 horses, good guns. You can sell them in town, get money. Or keep them, your choice. Jake looked at the pile of supplies. It was more wealth than he'd seen in a long time. I can't take all this. It's too much. You saved my daughter when you could have left her to die, Running Bear said. You stood ready to fight my warriors to protect her. You showed honor when most white men show only hate. He gripped Jake's shoulder. This is small payment for such debt. Take it with our blessing. Morning Dove spoke again, this time in rapid Comanche. Her father listened, then translated. My daughter say you should come to our camp. Meet our people. Share food and stories. She say you are lonely here by yourself, and it is not good for man to be so alone. Jake was surprised by the invitation, He'd heard stories of white men who'd been taken into Comanche camps and never seen again, but he trusted Running Bear. The chief had proven his honor. "I'd be honored to visit your camp," Jake said. Running Bear smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from him. "Good. We leave now. You follow us. Bring one horse to ride. We take the others to camp." Within the hour, Jake found himself riding with a group of Comanche warriors across land he'd never explored. They traveled north and west, into rougher country where red rocks jutted from the earth and canyons cut deep shadows. The warriors rode with easy confidence, their horses sure-footed on the rocky paths. Morning Dove rode beside Jake, pointing out landmarks and trying out her English. "That canyon we call Red Tears," she said, gesturing to a narrow gorge. "Long ago. Great battle there. Blood run like water." "Who fought?" Jake asked. "Comanche and Apache. Very fierce. My grandfather's grandfather fought there." She said something in Comanche to her father, and he nodded, adding details that Morning Dove struggled to translate. Jake listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a world he'd never known. They reached the Comanche camp as the sun was setting. It was larger than Jake had expected, with dozens of teepees arranged in a loose circle beside a creek. Children ran between the dwellings, and women tended cooking fires. The smell of roasting meat filled the air. As the warriors rode in, people emerged to greet them. Many stared at Jake with curiosity or suspicion. Running Bear raised his hand and spoke loudly in Comanche. The camp fell quiet, listening. He gestured to Jake and continued speaking. Jake caught his own name and the word for daughter. When the chief finished, an old woman approached Jake. Her face was deeply lined, her hair white as snow, but her eyes were sharp and bright. She looked Jake up and down, then spoke in surprisingly good English. "I am Wise Cloud Medicine Woman. Running Bear, tell us what you did for Morning Dove. This is a good thing. Very rare for white man to show such heart." She touched Jake's chest. "You are welcome here. But know this, if you bring danger to our people, we will not hesitate to kill you." "I understand," Jake said. "I mean no harm to anyone here." Wise Cloud studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "I believe you. Come, I show you where you sleep tonight." The next few hours passed in a blur of new experiences. Jake was given food, rich venison stew, and cornbread cooked over the fire. He sat with Running Bear and the other warriors, listening to their stories told in a mix of Comanche and broken English. They asked him questions about his life, about his ranch, about how he came to be alone on the frontier. Jake answered as best he could, aware of the many eyes watching him. Later, a drum began to beat, and the camp gathered for dancing. Jake watched, amazed by the energy and skill of the dancers. Morning Dove performed with other young women, her movements graceful despite her recent injury. When she finished, she came to sit beside Jake, slightly breathless. "You like our dancing?" she asked. "It's beautiful," Jake said honestly. "I've never seen anything like it." Morning Dove smiled. "Our people have many dances, some for war, some for peace, some for harvest. Each one tells story." She paused, then asked, "You have wife? Children?" "No," Jake said. "I'm alone." "Why?" Morning Dove's directness was startling. "You are strong, man. Good man. Why no family?" Jake thought about how to answer. "I came west to find land, to build something. I thought I'd find a wife later. But out here, there aren't many women. And the ones in town, they don't want a rancher with nothing but hard work to offer." Morning Dove frowned. "That is foolish. Hard work is a good thing. Shows strong character." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe Comanche woman would be better for you than white woman." Jake felt his face heat up. "I don't think that would work out well for anyone." "Why not?" Morning Dove challenged. "You already friend a Comanche. You wear my father's mark. You are brave and honorable. These are things we value." She laughed at his discomfort. "I am not offering myself. I am too young. But there are others. Widows. Women whose husbands died in battle. Some might be interested in a man like you." Before Jake could respond, Running Bear called Morning Dove over. She left with a mischievous smile that made Jake wonder if she'd been teasing him. He sat alone by the fire, thinking about her words. A few years ago, the idea of marrying a Comanche woman would have seemed impossible, even shameful. But now, after everything he'd experienced, his old certainties seemed less certain. That night, Jake slept in a teepee provided by Wise Cloud. It was surprisingly comfortable, warm and dry. He lay awake for a while, listening to the sounds of the camp settling down for the night. Voices murmured in Comanche, babies cried and were soothed, dogs barked at distant noises. It felt strangely peaceful, more like home than his empty ranch house had ever felt. He woke to the smell of coffee and cooking meat. Outside the teepee, the camp was already active. Jake emerged to find Morning Dove waiting for him with a tin cup of coffee and a plate of food. "My father wants to speak with you," she said, "after you eat." Jake ate quickly, aware of Morning Dove watching him with amusement. "What?" he asked finally. "You eat like wolf who has not hunted in many days," she said, laughing. "Slow down. Food will not run away." Jake found himself smiling, despite his embarrassment. Morning Dove had a way of putting him at ease, even when she was making fun of him. When he finished eating, she led him to Running Bear's tipi. The chief sat outside, smoking a pipe. He gestured for Jake to sit. "I think about you and your ranch," Running Bear said without preamble. "You are alone there. This is dangerous. Bad men like yesterday will come again. You need help." "I've managed so far," Jake said. "Yes, but only because we watch over you. This cannot last forever. My warriors have other duties."
Running Bear puffed on his pipe. "I have idea."
"What if some of my people come to your ranch, help you with work? In return, you teach them about cattle, about white man's ways, and they protect your property." Jake was stunned. "You want Comanche to live on my land?" "Not all time. They come and go. But always some there, helping and protecting." Running Bear met his eyes. "This would make alliance between us stronger. Show both our peoples that Comanche and white man can work together. What you think?" Jake turned the idea over in his mind. It was risky. If other whites found out he was harboring Comanche on his property, there could be trouble. But the benefits were obvious. Protection, help with the ranch work, and perhaps most importantly, a real connection between two peoples who were usually enemies. "I think it's a good idea," Jake said finally. "When would they start?" Running Bear smiled. "Today. I send 4 warriors back with you. Young men who need to learn patience and discipline. You teach them ranch work, they keep you safe. Fair trade." The 4 warriors Running Bear selected were all in their late teens or early 20s, eager and strong. Their names were Red Fox, Stone Wolf, Swift River, and Quiet Thunder. They spoke almost no English, which meant Jake would have to communicate mostly through gestures and demonstration. Morning Dove came along to help with translation for the first few days. The ride back to Jake's ranch was educational. The young warriors were curious about everything, asking Morning Dove countless questions that she translated. They wanted to know about his cattle, his house, his tools, his life. Jake answered patiently, beginning to see them not as fearsome fighters, but as young men not so different from himself at that age. When they arrived at the ranch, the warriors examined everything with interest. They were particularly fascinated by Jake's barn and this corral system. Red Fox, who seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group, walked around the property, nodding approvingly. He said something to Morning Dove, who translated. "He say you build well, strong and smart." He liked this place. Over the next few days, Jake began teaching the young Comanche how to manage cattle. They were quick learners, skilled riders who adapted easily to working with the steers. Jake showed them how to mend fences, how to check for disease, how to move cattle from one pasture to another. In return, they showed him Comanche hunting techniques and shared their knowledge of the land. Morning Dove stayed for 3 days before returning to her people. On the morning she left, she found Jake working on a fence post. "I must go back to my father's camp," she said, "but I will visit again. These warriors, they are good men. Treat them well, and they will be loyal to you forever." "I will," Jake promised. "Thank you for everything, Morning Dove. For trusting me, for bringing me to your camp, for helping me communicate with these men." She stepped closer and did something unexpected. She took Jake's hand and placed it over her heart. "You gave me life when death was close. I will never forget this. You are my brother now, in all ways that matter." Jake felt emotion tighten his throat. "You're my sister, then, and I'll protect you as I would my own blood." Morning Dove smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and then she mounted her horse and rode away, looking back once to wave. Jake stood watching until she disappeared over the ridge. The young Comanche warriors proved to be excellent help. They worked hard from dawn to dusk, never complaining about the difficult tasks Jake set them. In the evenings, they would sit around a fire and try to teach Jake their language while he taught them English. Progress was slow but steady. After a few weeks, they could communicate basic ideas without needing Morning Dove's translation. Red Fox turned out to have a talent for working with horses. He could calm even the most skittish animal with soft words and patient handling. Stone Wolf was the strongest, able to lift fence posts that would have required 2 men. Swift River had sharp eyes that could spot trouble from a mile away, and Quiet Thunder, despite his name, had a booming laugh that could be heard across the property. Jake's ranch began to thrive in ways it never had before. With extra hands to help, he could expand his herd and improve his property. The Comanche warriors brought game from their hunts, and Jake shared his crops and supplies. It was a genuine partnership, beneficial to everyone involved. Word of the arrangement eventually reached the nearest town, 40 miles to the east. Jake rode in one day for supplies and found the atmosphere distinctly cold. The general store owner, a man named Pete, who had always been friendly, barely looked at him. When Jake asked what was wrong, Pete glanced around nervously. "Folks are saying you got Comanche living on your land," Pete said quietly. "That true?" "I have 4 young men helping me with my ranch," Jake said carefully. "They work hard and cause no trouble." Pete leaned across the counter. "Jake, I like you, so I'm going to be straight. There's talk of organizing a group to come run them off your property. Maybe burn you out too. For being a traitor to your own kind." Jake felt anger flare in his chest. "Those young men saved my life. They're good people trying to live peacefully. Anyone who comes after them will have to go through me." "I figured you'd say that," Pete sighed. "Look, I'll do what I can to cool things down, but you need to be careful. Not everyone in town is as understanding as me." Jake bought his supplies and rode home, his mind churning. He'd known there might be trouble eventually, but he'd hoped for more time. When he reached his ranch, he found the 4 warriors waiting for him, their faces serious. Swift River had seen riders in the distance watching the property. "Trouble coming," Red Fox said in his broken English. He touched his rifle. "We ready." "I hope it doesn't come to that," Jake said. But he knew hope might not be enough. He sent Swift River to Running Bear's camp with a message explaining the situation. If there was going to be violence, Jake wanted the chief to know why. Running Bear arrived the next day with 20 warriors. He listened to Jake's account of the town's hostility, his face grave. "This is old story," he said finally. "White men fear what they do not understand. They see Comanche as enemy, always. They cannot imagine peace between us. What should we do?" Jake asked. "We wait," Running Bear said. "We prepare for attack, but we do not start fight. If they come, we defend, but we do not seek war." He looked at Jake with respect. "You stand with us, even though it make you enemy to your own people. This take great courage." "You're my people now too," Jake said. "All of you." The attack came 3 nights later, a group of 15 men from town riding hard toward Jake's ranch, torches burning in the darkness. But they found more than they expected. Jake stood in front of his house with his rifle, and beside him stood 30 Comanche warriors, their weapons ready. The townsmen pulled up short, their confidence evaporating. Jake recognized several faces in the torchlight. There was Dan Harris, who owned the saloon, Tom Spencer, the blacksmith, and others he'd traded with over the years. "Turn around and go home," Jake called out. "Nobody needs to die tonight." Dan Harris urged his horse forward. "Jake, you've lost your mind. These savages will kill you the first chance they get." "These men have been living on my land for 2 months," Jake said. "Working with me, protecting me. They've had plenty of chances to kill me, if that's what they wanted. Instead, they've been loyal friends and hard workers." "They're Comanche!" Tom Spencer shouted. "They're murderers and thieves." Running Bear stepped forward. "This is a bit very semantic, person. This is true."
"Some white men kill Comanche."
"Also true. But not all men are same. Jake Murphy show us that white man can have honor, can keep word, can be trusted." He raised his voice. "We make peace with him, not with all white men. Just him. If you leave him alone, we leave you. But if you hurt him, we come for you. All of you." The men from town looked at each other uncertainly. They were outnumbered and outmatched. Dan Harris finally spoke again. "This ain't over, Jake. You've made your choice, and you'll have to live with it." "I already am," Jake said. "And I'm living just fine." The townsmen turned their horses and rode away, their torches flickering in the distance. When they were gone, Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Red Fox clasped his shoulder. "You do good. Speak with strength. No fear." Running Bear approached. "They will not come back tonight, but this is not finished. More trouble will come." "I know," Jake said, "but we'll face it together." The chief nodded slowly. "Yes, together. This is a new thing, white man and Comanche standing together. Maybe it changed nothing, or maybe it changed everything." He looked at his warriors, then back at Jake. "Time will tell. But for now, you have our protection and our friendship. That is worth more than gold or land." As the warriors settled in for the night, building fires and posting guards, Jake stood on his porch looking at the stars. His life had changed completely since the day he'd found Mourning Dove bleeding in the dirt. He'd gained friends, allies, and purpose. He'd also gained enemies among his own people. But looking at the Comanche gathered on his land, protecting him as he'd protected one of theirs, Jake knew he'd made the right choice. Honor mattered more than comfort, and courage meant standing for what was right, even when it was hard. The future was uncertain and probably dangerous. But Jake Murphy was no longer alone, and that made all the difference in the world.